It was a rainy day in the city of Durham. You might say, so what? We have plenty of these. It rains most of the time in England. But this was not your typical rainy day. The rain was much harder and much longer lasting than usual. The water was running down the cobblestones of Tinkler's Lane as fast as a mountain river, and everything and everyone was getting really, really wet. The cathedral was getting wet, the castle was getting wet, the trees were getting wet, the houses were getting wet, the insects and the animals and the birds and the humans, all of them, young and not so young, tall and not so tall, were getting wet. The River Weir was getting wet. Well, rivers are supposed to be wet. Silly me. Betty the butterfly was the first creature to suffer from the raindrops. She was so delicate that every drop of rain that landed on her wings threatened to shred them into threads. So Betty was the first one who found the toadstool growing in the middle of the garden at the Weirview house. She quickly hid under it and just sat there, patiently waiting for the rain to end. Horatio and Henrietta the hedgehogs were obviously getting very wet too, and they just had to find a place to hide as well. They were passing by the Weirview house's garden when they saw a nice and bright toadstool growing right in the middle of the garden. They ran towards it and hid under it, just like Betty the butterfly. Betty didn't mind. She was really small, and the toadstool was just big enough to save all of them from the relentless downpour. Miles the mouse was running away from the rain too. Actually, he was running away from Oliver the cat, but the rain didn't help either. Miles's fur was drenched. The rain was pouring down his ears and his tail, and he was very, very annoyed. Suddenly, he saw Betty, Henrietta, and Horatio sitting under the toadstool and looking much drier than he did. "Would you be so kind as to let me under the toadstool as well?" he asked with his paws trembling. "I am really, really wet and cold." "Oh, we wish we could," said Horatio, "but there is barely enough space for the three of us. Dear, poor Miles is so desperate. We must find some space for him," said Henrietta. And the pair inched a bit closer to Betty and let Miles get under the toadstool too. Boris the badger was running along the garden path past the Weirview house when he saw the four animals standing under the toadstool and looking much drier and happier than he felt at that moment. "Dear friends, I would be most grateful if you could let me wait out the rain in your company, as I'm getting rather wet and cold," said Boris the badger as sweetly as he could. "Oh no, we can't," said Horatio. "There is simply no space left under this toadstool. And I would add another reason for not letting you stay with us, Boris. Just the other day, you were eyeing up both me and my wife Henrietta and discussing your plans for dinner with your friends. I have a suspicion that Henrietta and I were actually part of your dinner plan." Yes, I agree," said Miles. "I am not happy with you sharing our toadstool either. You just don't look trustworthy to me, Boris." "Horatio, Miles, I am sure you're mistaken. Boris is a good chap. He would never think of eating us for dinner," said kind Henrietta. "And look, there is a bit more space under the toadstool. I'm sure we can all make some room for Boris, especially if he promises to behave himself." "Oh yes, I absolutely promise to behave," said Boris the badger. He had just had lunch as well, so that helped him to feel quite sure he wouldn't get hungry enough in the next few hours to fancy eating anyone around. And besides, he was ready to promise anything at all for the chance to escape the wet. "Very well, we will all move a bit to let you get under the toadstool," said Betty the butterfly. So the animals all inched to the side and made some room for Boris. Bo the robin was sitting on a tree branch not far away from the toadstool, feeling that the branches above him were not working well as cover from the water anymore. The rain was way too hard, and the drops were constantly falling on Bo's head, and his feathers were getting really soaked. Bo saw the animals under the toadstool, and he thought that the toadstool would be much better protection for his feathers than the leaves. So he flew down and also begged the other animals to let him hide from the weather together with them. Horatio, of course, tried to use his usual argument that the toadstool was not big enough for all of them. But when the animals moved a little, they realized that there was a bit more space left for one more creature to be saved from the horrible weather. And so Bo joined the bunch. When Oliver the cat sniffed around every part of the garden where Miles usually hid and didn't find him, he licked the rainwater off his fur, realized that the weather was way too miserable to continue his search for Miles, and decided to take a break from his hunt. He saw a whole bunch of animals sitting under the bright red toadstool in the middle of the garden. "Hello, hello, my dear friends," said Oliver. "And how comfy you all look under there. I was wondering if by any chance I might find some space next to you, as I'm getting very much annoyed by the rain and I can't seem to find Miles anywhere. So I was also wondering if any of you had seen him recently." Miles the mouse, meanwhile, had moved as far from Oliver as he could, and he was sitting behind the toadstool, really, really still, hoping that Oliver wouldn't notice him. Bo the robin started shaking with fear, as he was used to flying to the highest branches of the tree when he saw Oliver nearby. But now with the rain being so hard, there was no way that his wet wings would let him fly away from the cat. Horatio and Henrietta moved closer together to make sure both Bo and Miles were hidden from Oliver's view. "No, Oliver, we haven't seen Miles or anyone else for that matter. And the toadstool is way too small for anyone else to fit under it. It's just me, Henrietta, Boris and Betty. There is no one else here," said Horatio, holding his head really high and feeling very protective of his friends. "Plus, Oliver, you can perfectly well find some cover from the rain inside the house of your favorite humans. Just go there and enjoy your warm and dry cat bed." "Yes, Oliver, I agree with Horatio. There is hardly any space for 4 of us. Go back to your own place," said Henrietta. Boris and Betty just nodded in support. So Oliver the cat didn't have any choice but to turn around and go back home. His favorite human, Steve, had gone shopping earlier that day, and Oliver was looking forward to his favorite treat, a tin of tuna. Just when Oliver climbed through the cat flap into his house, the rain finally stopped. The sun came out and the raindrops were glistening on the bright red toadstool, making it nice and shiny. The animals all came out from under it, and they were looking very happy that the sun had come out. Horatio, though, looked perplexed. How is it possible that at the beginning there was hardly any space for just Betty alone to hide under the toadstool? But somehow so many of us managed to find shelter and we all stayed safe and dry. "It's the rain, you silly," said Boris. "It made the toadstool grow. Don't you know such simple things, you pinhead? And come to think of it, now that the rain is over, I am kind of getting hungry." "Oh no!" screamed Horatio and Henrietta, and they ran as fast as they could into the bushes, and Miles followed them as fast as he could too. Boris just laughed and climbed on top of his favorite stump. he decided to use this rare occasion when the sun was nice and warm to sunbathe. Bo the robin flew up to his favorite branch, and Betty the butterfly looked at the beautiful toadstool, so big and roomy, and thought that it would make a nice house for the time being. So she decided to move in. The end.